Ever since the Rings of Power came out and started airing, I've heard thousands of comments from people who make the claim that Rings of Power ruined Tolkien, that's ruining Middle Earth, that it's ruining the chances of people getting into the franchise, it's ruining the chances for people growing to love the books that Tolkien wrote, making these ridiculous claims. And yes, they are ridiculous claims about how Rings of Power has completely ruined the intellectual property known as The Lord of the Rings. It's just not true. Is Rings of Power bad? Objectively, yes. I didn't think it was very good. From a lore perspective, it was absolutely atrocious. From a non lore perspective, it had a lot of things wrong with the show, but it also did some things right. My wife, as an example, has enjoyed the show to date, but she has never read the books. But as a generic stand up fantasy show, there are some elements that work, even if there are some tropes and some ridiculous things. But is it actually ruining The Lord of the Rings? No. And anyone who actually thinks that, not just the people who are making knee jerk reactionary comments online, but the people who actively think that, they don't really know what they're talking about. And they're not really fans of The Lord of the Rings. They're just reactionary trolls. And yes, I can say that. And I'm going to get some hate for saying that. I don't really care. There's a brilliant quote that I love to pull from Neil Gaiman. Over here. I got to change that over to light mode because it was really weird looking. Somebody made a comment that too many people now are not reading books and just spending countless hours staring at their televisions. Do you really think they will go read the books? Maybe a minuscule amount of them at best. Why don't we encourage reading instead of more mind numbing hours in front of their TVs? This person is suggesting that watching a show isn't going to get people interested in a franchise. There are also people who have criticized the Sandman adaptation for being woke, despite the fact that Neil Gaiman himself was behind the adaptation, and it's the first adaptation in years that he has approved and worked with. And he had this to say about people who claimed that The Sandman was ruining the franchise and that it wasn't going to bring people to the books and that it wasn't going to sell copies. He said, I've been hearing how many copies of Sandman have been sold in bookshops, comic shops, and online over the last 3 weeks. And trust me, it is not a minuscule amount of people reading it. It is an astonishing number. The Netflix Sandman show has sent them book buying. Everyone wins. This right here is the reality of Rings of Power. Not just the book franchise. The Lord of the Rings Online, owned by EG7 these days, just published their financial report, and the Lord of the Rings Online is up by 11%. Their population is up by 11% this year. That might not sound like groundbreaking numbers, but you know why those numbers are up for the first time in many, many, many years? Because the Rings of Power has generated interest in Middle Earth as a whole. And as a result, we have people going out there looking, are there video games based on Middle Earth that I can play? Video games based on The Lord of the Rings that I can go actively get involved in? Guess what? There's a brilliant MMORPG that has been out there for more than a decade now, 15 years this year. And people are going to, we have new people coming to that game for the first time in many years. And that's because Rings of Power has, at the end of the day, brought more people to the franchise. And I have been saying since the show started airing that no matter your feelings on Rings of Power, love it, hate it, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the one thing it will do is it will bring more people to the franchise overall. Some people might get turned off and say, you know what, the show was so stupid, I've never read the books, I don't even want to read the books by now, right? Some people will be that. But the overall majority of people will become interested in the book material regardless of whether they've read them or not before by watching the show. This article talking about how no, Lord of the Rings is not, Rings of Power is not ruining the Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to read through the beginning parts of it because they're not really that relevant. But this part here is the point, the part that I really want to get to. And yeah, I realize that some of you out there right now who have watched my videos in the past are probably saying, Tim, you're off your rocker. You've sold out to Amazon. Screw you. I'm unsubscribing for your channel because you're saying that I'm not allowed to hate the show. It is what it is at this point. I can say that I am not in the camp of people who think that Rings of Power has ruined the franchise. Did I dislike the show overall? Yes. Did I nitpick the hell out of it? I've done like 125 Rings of Power rant videos. Yes, I have nitpicked the hell out of this show. But at the end of the day, I have always given credit where credit is due, and I have always come back at the end of every rant and said, there's one thing that it will do, no matter what, it will bring more fans to the franchise. And this part of this article, it's new Lord of the Rings material. This is very important. I'm going to read through this and discuss because I think it's very relevant to the conversation being had around Rings of Power. And I'm going to read it mostly verbatim, but we're going to be talking about it as we go through. Although everyone is certainly entitled to their opinion, those who believe that the Rings of Power is ruining The Lord of the Rings seem to be ignoring several key factors. One of the biggest is that they are even being given new content that is set in the very world and franchise that they love at all. Considering how much material exists in Tolkien's legendarium, there are so many stories that have yet to be adapted in any form, much less in a way that general audiences will see. One would think that Tolkien fans would want to continue to see the author's stories get on the screen in adaptations they deserve, that they would want to support the Rings of Power and make it a smash hit. Now, that's not saying that everyone has to love the show. It's certainly not the best thing on television right now. But if fans have any hope of ever seeing the likes of the Children of Húrin or the Fall of Gondolin as told in a film or in a series, they have to approach the Rings of Power with an open mind at the very least. This is exactly the type of show so many Tolkien fans have been wanting for years, and it's not worth abandoning the idea simply because they made changes to the source material. Now let's break this section down, specifically the last part of it. This is exactly the type of show so many fans have been waiting for years. And I know some people have a knee-jerk reaction to that, and they're going to say, that's not true. Rings of Power is nothing like the show I wanted. It abandoned the lore, and they desecrated Tolkien, and no, yeah, I have to hate it because it sucked. They ruined it, and they have a malicious intent, and they purposely set out to ruin Tolkien and modernize it, and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to rant because I want to be ranty. No. What they are saying with this article is that if you want to see Children of Húrin and the Fall of Gondolin and other things from the Legendarium be produced in film and series, then what you want as a fan is you want Rings of Power to succeed. Love it or hate it, you need it to succeed, because if Rings of Power does not succeed, then you will never see anything else ever come out in our lifetime around all of the Legendarium stuff. This will be it. Because if this show fails completely, miserably, no one's ever going to take a risk on producing Tolkien ever again. So for the fans who want to see stories come out of Legendarium, well-told stories, you have to take the good with the bad. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs when you're making a cake. The Rings of Power is arguably some broken eggs, but at the end of the day, it's still a necessary ingredient towards hopefully eventually seeing more stories from Middle-earth be told on the big screen. So everyone, regardless of what type of fan you are, should want Rings of Power to succeed, even if you absolutely hate the show. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow for some people, because some people cannot move past their insistence that Rings of Power is ruining the franchise. But you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. And they go on to talk about this here. The Rings of Power is not and will not ruin The Lord of the Rings or any of Tolkien's many other stories. This series could even turn into the massive train wreck that some are already proclaiming it to be, and it still would not taint, destroy, or take away from any of Tolkien's works. And that's because, believe it or not, those works will still exist post The Rings of Power. The show is not detracting from Tolkien's writings whatsoever. It is actively building on the texts with a new adaptation that, whether you love it or hate it, bears no influence on the quality of material that already exists. Oh my God, this is brilliantly written. The Rings of Power is a fresh, supplementary show that serves as a new way for both diehard Tolkien fans and general audiences to engage with the franchise that they love. Absolutely true. And again, listen to what they're saying. They are saying that you can absolutely hate the show. You can. You can call it a massive train wreck. You can. There's nothing wrong with that. Art is subjective, and you, as someone viewing the art, have the right to dislike the art that's being presented. But it doesn't change the fact that Tolkien's works exist independent of the Rings of Power. They existed before, they will exist afterwards. They are never going to go away, and they are never going to be altered by the Rings of Power. The Rings of Power is no different than the Hobbit animated film, or the Return of the Film animated, or the Return of the King animated film, or the Bakshi animated film, or Peter Jackson's animated films, or the reason the books have always be there and they will always be there. That's great food for thought right there because it's a very rational take on a subject that many people are being irrational about. And I say this as someone who has created over 125 rant videos, many of which are knee-jerk reactions for the purpose of entertainment. But at the end of the day, I do realize that, much like Neil Gaiman said, it's going to sell books no matter what, and it's going to bring people to the franchise. The last part of this says, to say that the Rings of Power is ruining the Lord of the Rings is not just disparaging to the immensely talented creatives behind the show, but it's also disrespectful to Tolkien and his works. So let's dissect that for just a minute, because I know some people have been out there saying that Payne and McKay deserve to be crucified. They've made some ridiculous things. They've attacked the actors and actresses. I have criticized Payne and McKay immensely for what they have done on this show. I don't think they did a good job at all. I think they did not do their research. I think they rushed it. I do not think they were the right people for the job. But that doesn't detract from the fact that they have put in, at this point, thousands of man hours with crews of hundreds, thousands of people at this point to create this show. And there are a lot of, yes, immensely talented creatives. And we're not just talking about the showrunners, we're talking about the artists, the costumers, the set designers, the wig designers, the VFX specialists, the musicians, the think about that for a minute. There are thousands of people who have worked on this show. You may not like all of the things that the show is about, but it doesn't take away from the fact that these are creative people doing creative work. They have worked on many other shows before. They have done lots of work, and that work should be, this is very important, even if we critique that work, even if we critique the work, it should still be celebrated for being work. It's something that someone put passion into. I might not appreciate it from an artist's perspective, because art is subjective and I don't necessarily like all the things they did. But I also have to respect the fact that people worked hard on it, and people's hard work should be respected. That's what that's saying. Tolkien's stories have and will continue to withstand the test of time, and no adaptation, no matter how bad, will detract from the world he created in his writings. This franchise has already gone such a test with the Hobbit films, which, despite a lackluster 3-film adaptation, still holds up as one of the best fantasy adventure books of the last century. In creating his mythology, Tolkien established a universe that anyone could play in. It can be built upon, retold, and expanded in endless directions because it has that strong of a base. The Rings of Power is playing in the immense creative sandbox the Tolkien creative, and in doing so, it's only adding to and further cementing Tolkien's legendary legacy. And I have come back to this over and over and over and over and over. At the end of the day, no matter what you think about the Rings of Power, it is bringing more people to the franchise, and it is expanding upon the legacy that Tolkien created in the first place. So no, the Rings of Power is not ruining The Lord of the Rings. You might hate the show. You might think it's a train wreck. You might think it's the worst thing to ever hit television. But it's not ruining the franchise. More people are buying books. More people are coming to know the world that we know and love. More people are coming to realize that, wait a second, Mithril wasn't described in the books the way it's described in the show. Galadriel was a completely different character. Hang on, Sauron was way more nuanced than they have him displayed here. Oh, I see what they said. Okay. Oh my, I like this, and oh, this book is amazing. And now we get into I've never read about Aragorn and Merry and Pippin and Frodo and Sam and seeing Smeagol as this frail, broken creature because of what the ring did to him. And now I'm reading the Lord of the Rings and I'm getting hooked into this. And now I want to read the Silmarillion. And now I want to go read the histories of Middle Earth. And now I want to read War of the Jewels. And now I want to read blah 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 blah. That's the one thing that the Rings of Power is doing that you can't take away from it no matter how much you hate or dislike the show. And again, remember, I don't like the show. I am not in Amazon's camp here, but I agree with everything that this article said in terms of respecting the work that went into it and understanding that even if we dislike the art, nothing wrong with that, even if we dislike the art, we have to understand that it's not ruining the books. It will bring more people. It already is bringing more people to the books, and all it does is enhance the legacy, even if the show isn't what everyone wanted it to be. I loved this article. It's one of the better pieces I've read all year on the Rings of Power. I would highly recommend you go read the whole thing. I've got the link down below because there's like 2/3 of it that I didn't bother covering for this article because it goes into a whole bunch of other stuff that I've already talked about in my previous videos. So I just wanted to focus on this part today. So I know some of you are going to disagree vehemently. Um, doesn't matter. Leave your comments below. Let's have a discussion. And as always, if you did get to the end and you like what you heard here today, like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. I do videos every morning at 6 a.m. as premieres. I am here in the chat with everybody, so you can feel free to ask questions, suggest future content, talk about things. I'm always here during the premieres to support, which hopefully you do. Hopefully, I've earned your support by putting out all this content over the past couple of years. Like these people here, thank you so much for your support. Just drop a super thanks on this video after it's been uploaded, or if you're here during the premiere, you can do a super chat or a sticker. You can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild down there, which is the recurring month to month with 3 different tiers. We also have a Patreon page for my own fantasy world, which is a book series, a point and click adventure game, and a 5th edition tabletop setting. Work on that with my wife and my brother, so hopefully you'll check that out as well. I stream every single day video games. I also do watch parties of other shows: Star Wars, House of the Dragon, Rings of Power, Star Trek. We're doing the upcoming Willow show, Wheel of Time, so much more, book reviews, tons of stuff happening here on the channel. So hopefully we'll see you in those things as well. And until next time, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay sane. Don't let Rings of Power ruin you. Don't let it ruin you. It's just a show at the end of the day. It's just entertainment. Till next time, peace.